You guys always blow me away. Chris worked last night and got home about midnight. I was out speaking to a group that ended up in a long, lengthy discussion. Got home about midnight, and after we had our chat and so on, she said, "Are you excited about going to Pine Hill tomorrow?" Well, sometimes I don't show things, so I just sort of shrugged and said, "Oh, well, it's another sermon, another day, kind of a thing." She said, "Well, I'm excited about going Pine Hill tomorrow because I feel like we're going home." You see, out of most of our married life was spent here with you. David was born before we came here, but most of his life was spent here with you. And I think it's very exciting to be here, and I'm glad that Chris Richards, who has become increasingly a good friend, and one whom I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and Suzanne, who is now working with us and bringing a great deal of talent and ability to her work for us, enabled Chris and David and I to share with you today. It was a little over 100 years ago that the Brooklyn Bridge was built. And in the work of the Ecumenical Institute between Jewish-Christian relations and trying to understand how you relate to other people, the building of that bridge and the history of that bridge is rather interesting, because whether you are dealing with relationships between men and women, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, or whether you're just trying to understand relationships between nations, the building of a bridge is a rather interesting concept. And so very quickly I want to go into some of the elements that are bridge building, because I think if we can reflect upon them in our own lives, we're going to understand the Scripture and what Jesus was talking about, because one can say all the correct words, but one has to have action if they're going to build true bridges. The first thing is very clear. You have to have people of vision. One of the most frustrating things in the world is we can't do that. We tried it before. It can't be done. It's never been done before. Or in the more modern form, put it into writing, appoint a committee, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you all are well aware of it because it happens all the time in business. It's one of the ways to make people appear like they're doing something while avoiding action and carrying anything through. You got to have vision. You got to see that there is something to be done, and have the dedication and the ability to move toward doing it. Think about it. A vision. There's a gorge. Some sort of a problem that needs to be overcome. And seeing the vision begin to bring the resources necessary to accomplish the overcoming. And the Bible says what happens when people lose vision. And one of our problems is that too often we lose vision. We're so busy being, quote, realistic that we forget. I was speaking last night on the whole problems of the Middle East, which are extremely complicated, and to a group of lawyers, which makes it even more complicated. And one of the guys kept saying, "Oh, you're not being realistic. You're not being realistic. War's always been." Excuse me. And I said, of course war's always been, because we've assumed that peace was, and war's what happen when you don't have peace. And you've heard me work on this theme over and over again. It's time we wage peace. I said, how much money does the government, how much money do the churches, how much money do we individually spend on ways of understanding conflict resolution? And I said, half the people in this room are lawyers, and among those half the people in the room, most of you are arbitrators. Which was true. And I said, arbitration is a form of peacemaking. And you don't start off by saying no peace can be made, because you're dead as an arbitrator if you do. And so I think we have to have vision, and we have to see that there's a problem, and we have to set aside things that have gone in the past, and we have to take a solid look at the need for the bridge. Second thing, bridge requires two solid banks, two solid places to go. One of the problems is that we oftentimes try to build a bridge from a solid area to a weak area, then we wonder why the bridge collapses. You cannot have one solid side built on, let us say, the stone, and the other side built on quicksand. No matter how brilliant you are in terms of the building of the bridge, one side is going to sink, and ultimately it's going to disappear. We sometimes fail to recognize that you've got to have some equality between those with whom you're building bridges. And that means I approach the other person, the other group, with a totally different mindset, because I'm looking at them not in terms of trying to get to them, but as an equal person who is sharing with me in the endeavor. And the equality of person, the personhood of the person on the other side, is extremely important. For the past 12, 13 weeks, I've been teaching a course at Temple Bethel, part of the College of Jewish Studies, on Jewish-Christian relations. About half the class is Christian, and the other half is Jewish. It's been an exciting experience for me because one of the things that happened on one particular day, and I'm not even sure why, 4 different members of the class came up to me individually, and all 4 of them separately said essentially the same thing. We have been taking this class and have learned a tremendous amount about the other. If they were Jewish, about Christians, if they were Christians, about the Jews. But I want to tell you that we've been taking this class and we've learned far more about ourselves. One woman said, I have been a Methodist all my life. And I've learned more in the 12 weeks of this class than I have in all the church going I've ever gone to. Because in order to enter into conversation with the other person, you have to know where you stand. And you've got to know solidly. Strange that in America the 2 most fundamental things in our lives, other than family and friends and so on, are religion and politics, and those are the 2 things we don't talk about. And I've often wondered why. And I think the reason is that in order to talk about religion, in order to talk about politics, of course they're both emotional, but they become emotional because most of us don't know where we stand and we don't want to be put on the spot and be able to talk about it. What do you think about God? What do you think about Jesus? What do you think about the Bible? What do you think about why do you as Christians do this? So you've got to have solid foundations on both sides. I think very quickly too, no bridge is ever just plopped down. Oh, it might be possible in the modern world, but 100 years ago you can imagine them sitting on the gorge and trying to figure out no bridge had been built like this. The first thing you do when you're building a bridge is not have this whole thing that just falls into place, but you send a small little line out. David was telling me on the way out across the Niagara Falls they couldn't do it, so they flew a line across on a kite. You got to have some contact across the way, and it's always tenuous and it's always very, very weak. It doesn't hold much, but at least it's a contact. And how often we want to have relationships full-bloomed immediately. I'm ready for a relationship. Boom! No, that's not the way life is. You begin to build the bridge slowly. And after you get the line across, and we could go into all kinds of things on that, you begin to build more solid foundations. One of the things that becomes very clear in any kind of a bridge building or any kind of a relationship is that there are no plans. You always have to develop new approaches for that particular relationship. I have real problems with the how-to books. Don't you? How to get along with somebody. What is your name? Ruth. Now, for me to remember Ruth's name, I have to repeat it 3 times in conversation. Ruth, how glad to meet you. Ruth, I've been looking for somebody like you. Ruth. And Ruth is sitting there saying, another Dale Carnegie graduate. Right? You can't have a book telling you how to do things. Because the best the books can do is open you up to the potentials, but in the building of the bridge across the Brooklyn Bridge, they had to develop a whole series of techniques that were different than had ever been used before. Part of it was those foundations had to be put into water, and they had to develop a way of diving. Now it's relatively simple, but at that point it had never been done, and divers had to go down and work underwater, and all kinds of techniques were done because every situation in life requires some new development if we're going to build an absolute bridge that's going to work. Well, we build the bridge. We can talk about the fact that most bridges are built from both sides. But communication is necessary if you want the bridge to meet. Far too often we build bridges towards each other and find that we pass. Much of what goes for dialogue is not dialogue at all, it's duologue. You see, the difference between dialogue and duologue is this. In a monologue, I'd say to you, and you sit and listen, this is a monologue. Most sermons are. It's easier for the preacher that way. If I can just sit here and talk to you, I don't have to answer anything, and anything I say and you can't answer back, I'm in pretty good shape. I can even convince myself I'm full of authority and that what I'm saying is true, because nobody's walked out yet, except one little girl. And that happened before I started preaching. But you see, then we want to enter into dialogue with somebody. Now, dialogue is something else. We enter into what I call duologue. That is polite monologue. I talk at you, then I sit quietly while you talk at me, then you sit quietly while I talk at you, and then I'll sit quietly. You understand it? And we don't talk to each other, we talk at each other and past each other, but because we're facing each other, we say, oh, how well we're getting along. Dialogue means that I stand in my foundation and you stand on your foundations. I'm not trying to change you. You're not trying to change me. We're talking from where we are, and we're talking together so that we are meeting in the middle. Not on my side, not on your side, but in the middle. And we're doing it in such a way that we are really truly meeting, not passing. And so the bridge is built. Okay. All bridges are built for two-way traffic. Oh, I know, it can be made one way. But all bridges are built for two-way traffic. Think about it. How often is the two-way traffic really made one way? How often do we listen to our partners? Do we listen to our children? Do we listen to our parents? Do we listen to our pastor? Do we listen to our teachers? Do we listen to our bosses? Do we listen to our employees? Do we listen to the other people around us? How often do we allow the traffic to flow back and forth? All bridges need care. There are full-time teams that work on keeping the Brooklyn Bridge painted. And you can't establish a relationship and then assume it's going to continue without some work. And that's one of the major failures in marriage. You get married, and all of the wonderful things that bring you together and all of the hard work that makes it possible, suddenly you get married and everybody relaxes. We don't have to do anything anymore because we're married. We've got the relationship. And at precisely the time that all of the effort to make things work, and the bridge needs to be polished and painted, and rust needs to be looked out for, and weak planks repaired and replaced, at precisely that point, we sit there and we look across and say, see, we got the bridge to the person over there, and suddenly the bridge rusts through and falls into the river, and we don't even know why. Oh, what happened? You got to keep the things moving. You got to keep the paint up. You got to keep working on it. And that's true of the relationship to God every bit as much as it is to anybody else. I get so very tired of the so-called born-again movement. I think is a legitimate part of it. Don't misunderstand me. But I get so very tired of the born-again movement. A man who kills somebody when he's drunk is born again and will never drink again until he gets out, and within 24, 48 hours he's already hit somebody else drunk. I won't mention John DeLorean, born again. God help us for what that says to religion. Because if you don't have a relationship with God, you've got a long way to go. And to be born again means you have to grow. And if you don't grow, you die. And so the relationship to God is every bit as much a bridge building kind of a thing. And one of the problems that we have is we make God the one who builds the bridge to us instead of recognizing we have to be on solid foundations and build the bridge back. One of my great, as you all know, favorite movies of all time and favorite plays is Fiddler on the Roof. And I like the fact that Travia will sit there and look at God and shake his fist. Most Christians won't do that. Oh God, oh God, oh God. Jesus lifted up his eyes and prayed. Oh, bow our heads. How can you have a relationship to somebody you can't even look at? Think about it. How can you have a relationship with somebody that you're cowering behind? Think about it. Part of the bridge building is that God is solid in foundations, and God can take anything Jim Lyons could give him 1,000 million times over and not be bothered by it, so why am I so afraid of hurting God? I've got to stand and look God in the eye. Because that's part of the nature of the bridge. I think another thing, the bridge is built not for the best of times, but the worst of times. Even Jim Lyons can build a bridge across a gorge if it's only going to be a nice day with no wind and beautiful sunshine like today. Any of us can do that. You don't build a bridge for the best of times. The Brooklyn Bridge was built to withstand snow and sleet and hail and gale winds and accidents on it and fires on it and ice at the foundations of it And how many times do we build relationships with other people or with God, and the first time something goes wrong, we throw up our hands and say, well, what are we going to do? I expected better than that. How many times do we fail to understand, not only do we have the need to build the bridge, but that it has to be a bridge built that when things are going wrong, it still carries the traffic across. Can I tell you the number of people that are angry at God, and because they can't acknowledge it, they just turn God out of their lives? Can I tell you the number of people that are angry at themselves and they blame God for it? Can I tell you the number of times that things just seem to break down because people aren't really relating to each other and they're not dealing with the fact that you got to have communication more at the worst of times than at the best of times. When you hold somebody's hand and you're in love with them, and that love shows through, you don't have to say anything. But when you hold their hand and it's frozen, or when you can't even get close to them to hold a hand, you better start talking about something, because if you don't, it's going to get farther and farther away, and things begin to go down. When trust is no longer there, and all of these things that begin to happen, then we realize how phony our bridges are unless they are built to withstand even the most horrible tests. All bridges involve a risk. No major bridge has ever been built without accident or death, including the Mackinac Bridge. We don't want to risk. We want safe bridges. We want to know that we're going to be certain. That's where the vision comes in. We want to make certain that it's actually going to work, instead of beginning to deal with the fact that there is a risk always. And when you're dealing with another person or another group or another country or another individual, however you want to do it, dealing with God, you are never sure that your partner on the other side is going to fulfill the obligations, and that's the risk. There are enough problems whether you're going to fulfill. But if you say, I'm not sure and I won't try, you'll never build anything anyhow. That's built-in failure. And so part of it is that there has to be a risk, a trust, an ability to move beyond, an ability to say, I will learn from the mistakes of the past, I will not make foolish mistakes, but I still have to move beyond, which is the Christian concept of reconciliation and forgiveness. So the challenge comes into our lives in a unique way. Are we bridge builders? Are we a bridge builder between this church and the community? Are we a bridge builder between the pastor and the family of this church and the members of the church? Are we bridge builders within the membership of the church? Are we bridge builders with members of other races, of other communities, of other ethnic backgrounds, of other religious types? Are we bridge builders between nations, so that the kind of bridges that enable us to communicate and have friendly relationships are built? Are we bridge builders between those who have need of God and God? And are we bridge builders between us and God? I like the anthem, because the anthem says not all of us can do all things. On a bridge, there are a wide variety of people that work. Some of them are steel workers, some of them are planners, some of them are architects, some of them are a whole host of things. But on a bridge, there are a wide variety of people. And in the anthem, each and every one of us has certain talents that have to be brought to bear. And so the challenge of the morning for me is, can I take those talents which are mine, whether it be as a teacher or a social worker or a builder of the world's greatest bus that the world desperately needs. I tease Don a lot because he's a good friend and I love him dearly. But I have the same vision I've caught from him of what that bus can mean. And what he is doing there is building a bridge. A different kind of a bridge between peoples. Are you a bridge builder? If so, to whom and where are you building the bridge? Are you solid in your own foundations? And are you willing to take a chance?